It's the Real News Network, and I'm Greg Wilpert. 250,000 protesters took to the streets of London on Friday to declare their opposition to President Trump's visit to Britain this week. They chanted, "Donald Trump has got to go," and carried banners reading, "Dump Trump" and "Keep your tiny hands off women's rights." The highlight of the protest was perhaps the 20-foot balloon of a caricature of Trump as a giant snarling baby, which floated outside of Parliament. Before Trump's first meetings, though, he managed to spark outrage with an interview that he conducted with the tabloid newspaper The Sun, in which he commented on Brexit, on Theresa May's negotiations with the European Union, and whether the recently resigned Foreign Secretary, Boris Johnson, would make a good prime minister. Once in London, however, Trump had to backtrack some of his statements, saying that they were fake news and that he has a high appreciation for Theresa May. Joining me now to discuss Trump's visit to Britain is Thomas Barlow. Thomas is a journalist and organizer and senior editor of the UK-based Real Media. Thanks for joining us today, Thomas.
Thanks for having me.
Clearly, Trump managed to ruffle feathers with this interview that it was published just as he was meeting with Theresa May, and in which he questioned her leadership with regard to Brexit and suggested that Boris Johnson would make an excellent prime minister. Here's a recording of parts of the interview with the tabloid The Sun.
Well, if they do a deal like that, it will most likely, because we'll be dealing with the European Union instead of dealing with the UK. So it will probably kill the deal with, if they do that, their trade deal with the US will probably not be made. I would have done it much differently. I actually told Theresa May how to do it, but she didn't agree with it. She didn't listen to me.
What did she say?
She didn't listen. Well, I'm not pitting one against the other. I'm just saying I think he'd be a great prime minister. Yeah. I think he's got what it takes, and I think he's got the right attitude to be a great prime minister.
So, Thomas, as I said, this was certainly a kind of a bombshell of an interview, as it's been called. But how is it being received within the government? And will this undermine Theresa May's Brexit negotiations? Or is Trump being laughed off as a buffoon who is not to be taken seriously?
Well, Trump is the president of the United States, so he's not being laughed off. As ridiculous as he's seen, around the world, he's also seen as a serious threat, and he's the, leader of the most important economy in the world currently. That might not be the case by the end of his tenure. So it is being seen as quite serious, both within the government and amongst people. The Sun is the second most read newspaper. And it has caused problems probably within the government, but also actually it probably has shored up Theresa May's support, because even amongst conservatives, Donald Trump isn't that popular. And in fact, got stinging rebukes from across Parliament. Even the hard right and the very hard Brexit section of the Conservative Party did not support or retweet or sort of condone the interview that Donald Trump gave. So it has been taken seriously, but I'm not sure it's caused that much more trouble for Theresa May than she had already caused herself by inviting Donald Trump to the UK, and all the problems she's already had this week with the resignations from her cabinet and the problems she's having with the negotiations.
And so what about the impact that Trump is having on organizing in the UK? It is said that 250,000 people came out to demonstrate against him on Friday. Will this be a boon to organizing efforts against Theresa May, against the government? And what exactly are organizers and demonstrators pushing for in this context?
I think it's always good to get people on the streets, and it's important that we've come out against this particular person in such large numbers, and that there's such unity across the country in terms of the way that Trump is viewed. However, this isn't part, I think, of a significant ongoing campaign, probably, or series of street protests. That's probably not going to happen, and it probably won't be a boon to any particular movement, because Trump is seen as a danger by people who are both pro-Brexit and anti-Brexit, by liberals and left-wingers alike. For instance, the former leader of the Liberal Democrats, Nick Clegg, said, "I wasn't going to protest Trump, but then I've seen what he said about NATO, the EU, and the WTO, and I felt like I had to come out." So he's managed to ally liberals who are, very much for the current world order, and left-wingers who are very much against that current sort of globalized economy and infrastructure. At the same time as just most decent people in the UK. There was a poll done this week before he came, and YouGov, the only people who got the election right, and it shows that 16% of British people think he's honest, and 74% of British people think he's a sexist. Only 63% think he's racist, but it's still a significant majority. So this also comes in the same week that the Financial Times released findings that negative attitudes towards immigration had significantly decreased. So whilst it may not be the beginning of a movement, it is an important moment, and it's actually showing maybe, it's giving an opportunity for British people to unite around a particularly hateful and nasty figure.
Well, actually, speaking of which, I just want to play the clip that we have about Trump making comments in this. He said in the same interview with The Sun, he said that uncontrolled immigration is destroying Europe's culture. Here's what he had to say about this.
I think what's happened to Europe is a shame. I think the immigration, allowing the immigration to take place in Europe is a shame. I think it changed the fabric of Europe. And unless you act very quickly, it's never going to be what it was. And I don't mean that in a positive way. So I think allowing millions and millions of people to come in to Europe is very, very sad. I think you're losing your culture.
So this is really an extremely xenophobic statement, I would say, straight out of the playbook of the extreme right in Europe. How is this being received in Britain? And will this kind of thing boost the far right in Britain, or will there be a backlash against Trump for this type of xenophobia?
Both things are true. It sort of hardens attitudes against him and against America in some respects for having picked a president such as this. But it also hardens attitudes amongst the right. First off, the hard right, the very hard right in the UK, honestly feel like they have a figurehead now, and they have someone who with significant power that they can look up to, and they sort of protect him at all costs. They're absolutely disgusted by the protests, for instance, whereas they said nothing about protests against Cameron or Obama or Bush or Blair. They had no problems with any of those, left or right. They didn't mind those protests, but they're very upset about these protests against Trump. Also, there's the UKIP, and UKIP party is definitely far right. It's further right than the Conservative parties and has dragged the Conservative Party very rightwards. But specifically Nigel Farage's, who's the former leader of the UKIP, his close connections to Trump and his very heavy support of Trump has brought a lot of UKIP supporters who are maybe, anti-immigration but didn't feel comfortable being openly that racist and that xenophobic. It's hardened their rhetoric as well, and it's made people feel a lot more comfortable on that. I've been on forums and discussions all week in the weeks leading up to this, and you can see that the rhetoric from people who would be far right but like not extremely far right has hardened because of Trump. I mean, he's an extraordinarily hard right figure, and it's amazing that this person is a president of the United States, because we'd expect these from demagogues, of peripheral countries, but of the, most important economy in the world. That's something new, and one that also is a country that Britain has close cultural ties with. Often we're quite dismissive of the US, but also we're very influenced by it, a lot more so than continental Europe because of the language and the common culture. So yes, the majority of people are absolutely disgusted, and it's just deepened their disgust with him. But for those who had sympathy for him, they're even more sympathetic, and now they are further right, more xenophobic and more racist because of his visit.
Wow. Well, unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there for now. I was speaking to Thomas Barlow, senior editor of the UK-based Real Media. Thanks again for having joined us today, Thomas.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining the Real News Network. I'd like to remind everyone, we are in the midst of our summer fundraiser and need your help to reach our goal of raising $200,000. Every dollar that you donate will be matched. Unlike practically all other news outlets, we do not accept support from governments or corporations. Please do what you can today.